Zara Todd, you've come over from London to the European Parliament here in Strasbourg. First of all, how was the journey over? Because for a lot of people with disabilities, they say that transport is a real problem.
Surprisingly, the journey over was actually quite good. I have a lot more problems trying to get around London than, ironically, I had getting to Strasbourg. The only slight fly in the ointment it will be my return journey when we have to wait 4 hours in Paris because there's only 2 wheelchair spaces on the Eurostar to get back to the UK. But yeah.
I mean, otherwise, were you quite happy with the way, for example, Eurostar were able to look after you on the journey?
Eurostar actually is a very good transport mechanism. I wish that more London's transport systems were as reliable as Eurostar is.
And one of the new transport connections coming to London is of course, Crossrail, and there's been lots of conversation about the accessibility of Crossrail stations. What do you make of that ongoing debate?
I find it absolutely appalling that a city that has recently hosted the Paralympic Games, that says that there's a Paralympic legacy, within a year of the Paralympics finishing, is considering creating a new transport system where 7 stations will not be accessible, and 2 of those will be in the Olympic borough of Newham, where the stadium is. And to me, that is ridiculous.
And do you see any chance of that changing? Because it's still all being built. So is there a chance, you think, that the politicians could change their minds?
Well, there's definitely an opportunity for them to change their minds, to make the 7 Crossrail stations that currently will not be fully accessible would take 0.5% of Crossrail's budget. So it's hardly anything, and it would be a long-standing legacy. There is political will from Boris Johnson to make those stations accessible, but unfortunately the decision as to whether those stations are accessible or not doesn't lie with him.
And the European Commission, the EU, has talked about in the past all future transport connections being accessible, whether they're conversions of existing transport or they're completely new stations. Does that kind of message from Europe, do you think that kind of helps in arguments like this one?
I think the European Union saying things like that does really help, and the European Parliament statement is useful. I think the problem is that turning that into reality isn't happening at the moment. It's still acceptable to plan a transport system in London and it not be fully accessible. So I think Europe needs to show its teeth a bit more to the designers of Crossrail.
And is that one of the kind of things you've learned from coming out to the European Parliament here? What has been the main purpose of you coming out here to Strasbourg?
For me personally, it's been to raise the importance of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and how that affects disabled people across Europe, but more specifically what the European Parliament can do about that. One of the key things about it is it covers rights to every aspect of life, including transport, which the European Parliament actually has quite a lot of control over.
And as far as I understand it, the European Union as a whole, and therefore also the UK, has signed up to this UN convention. So therefore, do you feel that the UK and parts of Europe are falling short of their responsibilities?
I think for certain aspects the UK are not as far ahead as they should be with the implementation of the convention, and I certainly think from the evidence I've heard from other freedom drivers this week, the rest of Europe isn't doing much better, if at all better. So I think there is a lot of work that still needs to be done to make disabled people's rights a reality in Europe.
And just finally, the power of a message of the Freedom Drive as a whole, you all coming together from across Europe, how important do you think that is? And to, every 2 years reinforce that message here in the European Parliament?
I think the freedom drive is essential because disabled people are often, because of lack of access and lack of accessible transport, invisible within their communities. We're considered to be a minority group that may or may not be important to our national government, whereas actually disabled people account for around 20% of Europe's population, and the freedom drive is an opportunity for us to demonstrate that we exist, that we matter and we have a voice, and to try and get our rights made reality.